I'm Mike, or if you prefer, Taz, and on behalf of Dr. Sean and Deb, I'd like to welcome you to Jester Politics' second video in our series on the Constitution. In the first video, we left off with the end of the Annapolis Convention of 1786, in which the delegates, led by Madison, Hamilton, and Dickinson, called for a second convention, the purpose of which was to redo or modify the Articles of Confederation. In response to this call, 12 states appointed 73 delegates, 55 of which would eventually participate in what's become known as the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The only state not to participate is Rhode Island. I think we have to remember that these 55 people that showed up in Philadelphia were America's A-team. 8 of the participants signed a Declaration of Independence. 25 participated in the Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War, and 40 participated in the Congress of the Confederation. There can be absolutely no doubt that every one of these individuals were ardent patriots who gave loyalty to the new nation. However, it also has to be recognized that every one of these people were also citizens of their individual states. And at the time, the states were more of a sovereign nation in a league of friendship instead of what we would call a nation as we know it today. So they owed loyalty both to the newly founded United States and also to their own state. And many of them were very skeptical about a central government, and all of them were very jealous of the sovereignty of their nations and were not going to give that up if it put that state at a disadvantage to another state. And that underlying conflict would come out time and time again during the Constitutional Convention. With this in mind, the Constitutional Convention opened on May 25, 1787, and the first order of business was to elect George Washington as the president. And that, I think, is the most critical decision that was made at the convention, because without Washington's stature, the convention would have probably have failed. The first crisis of the Constitution came just 4 days after it opened on May 29th, when Edmund Randolph introduced James Madison's Virginia Plan. Remember that the convention was called to amend the Articles of Confederation, but the Virginia Plan was actually a plan to scrap the Articles and replace them with a whole new governmental system with a strong central government. In spite of the fact that this was a surprise to most, if not all, the non-Virginia delegates at the convention, the Virginia Plan would go on to become the basis of our Constitution. However, before getting there, it would cause a lot of problems. The two major ones were the divide between big states and small states over representation, and the other one was the divide over slavery. The problems that representation and slavery raised at the convention were distinct, but to the degree they were interwound. On the representation side, the larger states wanted proportionate representation because with the larger populations, they would get more members elected to the federal legislature, and therefore they dominate the federal government. Conversely, the smaller states demanded equal representation. Madison took a hard stand on this, and he was of the opinion that the larger states should just go ahead and ratify their constitution with proportionate representation, and the smaller states would have to eventually join out of necessity. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and Franklin and Sherman from Connecticut hammered out what was called the Connecticut Compromise, in which the House of Representatives would have members elected based on population of each state or proportionate representation, and the upper house, which became the Senate, would have 2 senators from each state. Now, Madison still wasn't happy, but the Connecticut Compromise was adopted nonetheless. Now, the second major conflict that came in was slavery. And I want to emphasize the question was not whether they should ban the ownership of slaves. The question was whether or not they should ban the importation of slaves. So it was a question of slave trade, not slavery. And that was really abhorrent to any thinking man in today's world. At the time, there was quite a few people who were anti-slavery, but definitely they were a minority. More importantly, for the Constitutional Convention was the southern states took the stance that if the slave trade was banned, then they would not join the Constitution. The slave states also had an additional demand, and that was for representation purposes. that their slave population be counted as 3/5 of a person. That was because their populations were less normally than the northern states, and in this manner they would increase their representation among the House of Representatives. In order to get the Constitution approved, the other states went along with these two demands and became known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. They actually wrote into the Constitution that Congress could not ban the slave trade until 1808. With these two issues resolved, the Constitution was able to be approved by the representatives. Now, that's not to mean that there wasn't often vicious arguments over other aspects or almost all of the other aspects of the Constitution, but these two major conflicts were resolved and the Constitution was approved. Of the 55 people who attended, 39 actually signed the Constitution. 9 of them did not sign for personal reasons. They were absent, and the other 7 didn't sign because they had fundamental disagreements. But the Constitution was finally signed and referred to the states for ratification, which would be a whole nother problem. With that, we'll wrap this one up, and the next one will be on the ratification, and then we'll move into our civil liberties. Thank you for coming. Have a great day. Bye.